Yeah, f***s went up pretty bad.
Hi, as you probably know, as you're here, I put out a video recently about the GlobalEye versus the E-7. Got a lot of grief, got a lot of feedback. Some of my facts weren't quite on. I have to admit, look, I'm trying to learn as best I can. I have to come out straight and say I prefer the GlobalEye. As you noticed in the first video, the GlobalEye is the one during the intro the whole time through. I much prefer the Swedish product, Canadian Swedish product, which I didn't mention as much as I should have in the last video, how it's Canadian and Swedish. It's built on a Bombardier airframe, which is just, if you've seen any of my videos, you know how much of a Bombardier fan I am. Wow, absolutely beautiful aircraft. I'm going to read two comments, one by Ron and one by James. One is kinder, one is a little bit harsher, but I definitely appreciate the corrections. They need to be done, they need to be done. It's a bit of a chilly day here in Quebec, so what I think I'm going to do is, if you don't mind, I'm going to I don't want to offend anybody, but there we go.
One eternity later.
So, today's correction time. I'm going to read out a couple of comments I got, and we'll talk about exactly how bad it was. Here's what Ron has to say.
Hey, Pierre, I know you're a computer guy, not a defense guy, so I won't be as mean to you as some on here. That said, you couldn't have got it more wrong if you tried. Okay. And Ron is one of the nicer ones, so thanks, Ron, for being kind of gentle. So Ron goes on to say, first, the E-7 was cancelled by the US and therefore will not be available to NATO or anyone except Australia, who already got theirs. Each aircraft has its strengths. As a bigger aircraft, the E-7 had better range and 360 functionality. That's about it for advantages. I also think that mid-air refueling is quite an advantage. The GlobalEye attacks the problem differently. Yes, the radar has a slightly shorter range, but it has better discernment, able to better detect even some of the smallest drones, and is better at penetrating stealth systems. The GlobalEye flies much higher, faster, and produces a lower radar signature. Yes, the E-7 is better at traditional command and control in large-scale operations, but again, Saab attacks it differently. The GlobalEye is a sensor node on the battlefield, feeding data directly to airborne and ground-based weapon systems, as well as ground-based command and control. I expect they also use a lot of AI as well to help bring a unified picture together and spot opportunities. Now that the E-7 is shut down, apparently NATO has selected GlobalEye, and the others that had selected the E-7 will now likely select GlobalEye instead. Question: if Saab makes a special edition version that's called GoldenEye and painted in real gold leaf, do you think Trump would buy it for the United States Air Force? Yeah, pretty good.
And now here is what James had to say. This is pretty rough.
I normally enjoy Canadian Shield's videos, but this one really missed the mark. A few factual corrections on the comparison segment worth noting, offered respectfully. See, that's pretty cool. Trolls note that one. First, GlobalEye is a command and control platform, not just an observation system. Saab explicitly designs and markets it as an airborne early warning and control system. The C2 capability is built in. Dismissing it as a passive sensor that only observes and informs is not accurate.
So here you're absolutely right. I guess there's like two different philosophies. The E-7 will have a complete crew on board, whereas the GlobalEye will have a smaller crew. But apparently I was saying that there was no control function being done from the aircraft. Apparently two of the crew are dedicated as air combat controllers. So mea culpa, my mistake. I think also the philosophy behind the GlobalEye is to transmit everything that they're picking up to ground command, whereas the philosophy of the Americans is to have, / Australians for this plane, is to have everybody up in the air. You know, I think to myself, you know, can a signal be jammed? Maybe. Let me know in the comments. Would that be a fear that we should have with the GlobalEye that we don't have with the A7? Excuse me, that we don't have with the E-7?
Second, the claim that the United States is already adopting the E-7A Wedgetail as a NATO standard is misleading. The US currently operates the E-3 Sentry and has its own replacement roadmap. The E-7A is operated by Australia, the UK, South Korea, and Turkey. Those are not the same thing as American adoption. Yeah, the criticism is absolutely fair if interpreted literally, but the US is still operating the E-3 today, and its E-7 transition is still underway.
My point was, that the E-7 is increasingly emerging as a preferred Western successor ecosystem for airborne early warning, with multiple key U.S. allies already operating it and the U.S. Air Force itself selecting it as its planned E-3 replacement. I wrote this answer a couple of weeks ago. Things have changed since then. Oh, God, I just can't keep up. So technically I was wrong, but yeah, I was wrong. The timeline that I knew of a couple of weeks ago is on screen right now.
Third, the video lists the Boeing E-7, E-3 as a single system. The E-3 Sentry and the E-7A Wedgetail are completely different aircraft on completely different airframes. That conflation matters when you're comparing specs.
Yeah, now, James, you're just being hard on me. It was just clearly a joke. You can hear the inflection and so on, and my humor is kind of like that. I pretend to, okay, it's all good.
Fourth, crew size. The narrator, that would be me, frames GlobalEye's smaller mission crew as a weakness. For Canada, it's the opposite. The E-7A carries a mission crew of roughly 10 to 12 specialists. GlobalEye operates with around 6 to 7. Canada is building its capability largely from scratch. That means every crew position requires a trained specialist coming out of a pipeline that does not yet exist at scale. Fewer crew positions per aircraft means a faster path to operational readiness and a smaller total trained personnel pool required to sustain consistent flying hours across a fleet. That difference could be measured in years when standing up a new capability.
Yeah, that's actually a really fair point, and I probably underemphasized the personnel and training angle. My argument was less about the crew quantity itself being a weakness and more about the operational depth and battle management capabilities or capacity in a high-intensity NATO environment. The trade-off is that larger crews can support broader missions specializing in command and control functions, while smaller crews can absolutely simplify force generation, training pipelines, and long-term sustainment for a country like Canada that's building its capability almost from scratch. Yeah, almost. Okay, pretty much from scratch.
Fifth, Arctic logistics. This point compounds the crew argument. Every person deployed to an Arctic forward operating location requires food, shelter, heating, medical support, and resupply, all of which is exceptionally expensive and difficult in Canada's north. A smaller crew per aircraft means a smaller forward footprint per sortie. And that savings multiplies across multiple aircraft, multiple rotations, and years of operations. The narrator, that's me, treats crew size as a C2 limitation. In the Canadian Arctic context, it's a force structure and logistics advantage.
Another good point, especially in the Canadian Arctic. Smaller crews can absolutely translate into lighter deployment footprint, reduced sustainment burden, and potentially higher operational tempo from austere Arctic locations. The real debate is whether Canada should optimize primarily for maximum NATO-style battle management capacity or for sustainable sovereign operations across enormous northern distances. In a world where the long-term cohesion and direction of NATO itself is increasingly being questioned, that sovereignty-focused argument carries more weight than it might have a decade ago, a year and a half ago. Whatever, I digress.
Sixth, cost per aircraft. France signed a contract in December 2025 for 2 GlobalEye aircraft, including ground support, training, and sustainment for approximately $1.3 billion US, or roughly $670 million per aircraft fully packaged. The U.S. Department of Defense cited E-7A unit costs rising to $724 million per aircraft before sustainment and training are added. Canada has announced a $5 billion AEW&C budget. At GlobalEye pricing, that envelope could realistically support 4 to 5 aircraft. At E-7A pricing, you're looking at considerably fewer. More aircraft means more simultaneous Arctic coverage, which is the actual operational requirement Canada faces.
Another legitimate point, and I probably should have spent more time on fleet economics versus pure platform capability. For a country like Canada, geography matters enormously. The ability to field more airframes within a fixed budget can translate directly into more persistent Arctic coverage, more rotational flexibility, and greater sovereign presence across massive distances. My original point was focused more on the E-7's larger battle management ecosystem and interoperability advantages, but there's absolutely a credible argument that Canada's operational reality may favor fleet size, sustainment practicality, and northern coverage density over maximizing NATO-style command and control capacity in a smaller fleet.
Seventh, operating cost. The GlobalEye is based on the Bombardier Global 6000 business jet, which has a 70% lower maximum takeoff weight than the 737-based E-7A. That translates directly to lower fuel burn, lower maintenance costs, and the ability to operate from smaller and more austere airfields. For Arctic deployment, that last point alone is operationally significant.
Another good point. Particularly for Canada's geography, the Saab GlobalEye, being based on a Bombardier global platform, does bring meaningful advantages in fuel efficiency, operating costs, runway flexibility, and sustainment footprint compared to the larger 737-based Boeing E-7 Wedgetail that's been around since the 737's been around since the 50s? My original framing
lean towards mission system scale and alliance interoperability, but Canada's Arctic reality changes the weighting considerably. The ability to operate from smaller northern airfields with a lighter logistical burden is not a minor detail. It's potentially a major force multiplier for sovereignty operations.
Cost per aircraft, definitely. Economy per aircraft is important. But I think it should always start with requirements. You don't want to have the second best of something and find out that even though it was cheaper, it's ineffective for what you're doing. Again, I'm wondering, are we equipping ourselves for the last war? Should we be looking at drones a whole bunch more?
Eighth, and this one is specific to Canada. The GlobalEye airframe is built by Bombardier. Every unit ordered supports Canadian aerospace manufacturing jobs and keeps one of Canada's most strategically important industrial programs healthy. For a Canadian procurement decision, that's not a footnote, that's a core argument. For Canada, GlobalEye's multi-domain capability covering air, maritime, and ground surveillance is genuinely well matched to Arctic sovereignty and coastal monitoring requirements. The E-7A is an excellent alliance warfare platform, but the framing that's obviously the right answer for Canada specifically does not hold up under scrutiny. Holy frig, how wrong was I? Okay, this is probably one of the strongest arguments in favor of Saab GlobalEye from a Canadian perspective, and it should have been emphasized more. Look, I absolutely agree. The aircraft is built on a Canadian-made Bombardier platform, which means procurement dollars would directly support Canada's aerospace sector, high-skilled manufacturing jobs, domestic maintenance capability, and long-term industrial sovereignty. And honestly, as someone who's always had a deep admiration for Bombardier aircraft and what Canadian aerospace engineering has accomplished, wow, I really should have put more on that. But if you watch my other videos or my older videos, you'll see that I talk about Bombardier all over the place. I put a snippet of a documentary I watched on the Challenger in the 1980s. There was a part to that documentary that moved me so much. Oh my God, I remember it today. Pachelbel's cannon playing in the background with the narrator saying this amazingly inspiring stuff. Actually, here it comes next.
The sheets and blocks of aluminum, the hundreds of miles of wires, the ideas and craftsmanship of thousands of people finally come to life within the personality of a single machine. The test pilots talk of high control power, of harmonization of control forces, of good balance and handling, the qualities of a great aircraft. But Atkins brags that this aircraft is gifted with at least tangible of qualities. It enjoys flying, if such a thing is possible.
So that's it for this Lakeside Mea Culpa video. Oh, I forgot to mention, I did some interviews recently. I did an interview with a NORAD specialist, Professor Andrea Charon from the University of Manitoba. Look her up. I thought I was an overachiever. Go look at her bio. Crazy. So we're going to have her on shortly. I also did an interview with Professor Rob Hubert from the University of Calgary, who is an expert in everything Canadian defense. Some surprising things. Wow, he had some surprising things to say. Again, I don't know where I land in a lot of this stuff. I'm kind of sitting in between two chairs waiting to see what makes sense to me and what makes more sense to me. If you like this video, please click like, subscribe, click on notifications, leave a comment and share. Leave comments. I mean, I know there's going to be plenty of corrections after I've done this correction video. So please, I do appreciate people chiming in. And yeah, even the trolls, I guess. Thanks for spending time with me. I'm Pierre Shields for Canadian Shields. Go play outside.